Very importantly, my administration is also standing up for the free speech rights of all Americans. You look at Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media giants, and I've made it clear that we as a country cannot tolerate political censorship, blacklisting, and rigged search results.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. I'm going to keep on this subject, and I urge all of you out there to be vigilant in your efforts to get the truth out there. I was contacted this week from, of all places, my YouTube account. The person concerned commented that they couldn't understand why so few people had seen a particular podcast. Well, I replied, an interesting comment. Why would that possibly be? I can't imagine. Please share, and maybe, just maybe, we can bypass the California Silicon Valley censorship. Thanks. Unquote. That's what I put. That's the point here, isn't it? I'm going to play for you a fairly long piece from Tucker Carlson. It's June 25. There's very little point in putting up a link because, as you know, Fox News remove it as soon as you post it, but I'll put it up there anyway. Here's that piece.
A new investigation has exposed Google's efforts to make sure the 2020 election goes the way it wants. You know which way that is. Google naturally is doing its best to suppress and hide the story, and a lot. In fact, it may determine what happens in the next presidential election, very well may. A Google whistleblower has come forward to describe his company's plans to remake the American political landscape. Google, of course, is the most powerful company in the world. So when an anonymous whistleblower comes forward, in this case telling Project Veritas that Google is using internal algorithms to shape what Americans see online, and by extension what they think, you better take it seriously.
Fairness is a dog whistle. It does not mean what you think that it means, and you have to apply doublethink in order to understand what they're really saying. And what they're really saying about fairness is that they have to manipulate their search results so that it gives them their political agenda that they want. And so they have to rebias their algorithms so that they can get their agenda across.
That's the definition of propaganda, again, being perpetuated by the single most powerful company in the history of the world. This is not surprising to viewers of this show. James Dorn was fired for Google for his political views, his totally conventional, moderate political views, and then came on this show to describe the culture at Google. Watch this.
There are definitely some political biases within Google that I was trying to shed light on in the document, and that they affect many parts of the business, and for example, who they do business with and what type of content they create. And I really think that those political biases need to be addressed.
It's not just whistleblowers, though. Excuse me. Hidden camera footage obtained by Project Veritas shows a conversation with a woman called Jen Janai. Her Google title is Head of Responsible Innovations in the Global Affairs Department. In that video, Janai says that Google is working specifically on products to make certain that Donald Trump does not win another election. Quote, we're also training our algorithms like if 2016 happened again, would the outcome be different? People were not putting that line in the sand, that they were not saying that what's fair and what's equitable. So we're like, well, we're a big company. We're going to say it. In other words, we're going to try and affect the outcome of the 2020 presidential campaign. Janai goes on to blast Elizabeth Warren's proposal to break Google up into two companies. Why? Check out this reasoning. Quote, all these smaller companies who don't have the same resources that we do will be charged with preventing the next Trump situation. It's like a small company cannot do that. Huh. So using a company's dominance on the internet to sway the outcome of an election, that's their plan. There should be a term for what Janai is describing. Turns out there is a term. It's a term you've heard constantly from talking heads on television for more than 2 years. It's called hacking an election. Google wants to hack our election. They're saying that out loud. As we've been told over and over again by CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times and all the other propagandists, hacking an election is very bad. At minimum, it warrants a multi-year investigation by law enforcement agencies. And yet, it's happening now. The Washington establishment has said they want to prevent election interference, but of course that's a lie. They just want to make sure they control the elections. That's their only goal. That's why they're not attacking the real source of election interference, which is Silicon Valley. Google, Facebook, and their ilk have far more political power than Russia ever has or ever will have. No serious person doubts that. But the people in charge of our country don't care about any of that, because when Google meddles in an election, Democrats benefit. By the way, if you want to find that video, you can't access it on YouTube. Google took it down. That's not surprising. You can already be tossed off of YouTube and Facebook if you decide they're using speech you don't like. They'll accuse you of hate speech, whatever that means. Now they can toss you off their sites just for putting up videos that make you look bad. They probably won't be banning any DNC videos anytime soon. You can be certain of that. Meanwhile, this week, Ravelry, a knitting social networking website with 8 million members, banned all explicit support for Donald Trump, and only for Donald Trump. And they got away with it. And because they have gotten away with it, other platforms almost certainly will do the same thing. All of this is going on flagrantly in public, but most Republicans haven't even responded to it. They haven't reacted at all. As soon as the 2016 election was over, the press and big tech openly began plotting on how to control the narrative in 2020, which is another way of saying control the election outcome in 2020, and using the scapegoat of fake news as an excuse to control the public discourse. Republicans were in charge of Congress at the time. They did nothing. The White House commands a vast regulatory apparatus. They've sat motionless and done nothing. The only Republican who seems even interested at all in the subject and keeping big tech in check at all is new Senator Josh Hawley. He just introduced a bill that would force tech companies to act as genuinely open platforms in order to receive valuable regulatory benefits. That's the deal. They're violating the deal. Nobody else seems to care. Passing Hawley's bill does not seem to be a conservative priority, though. No one in Congress is talking about it. That's a big mistake. Successful political parties look out for their supporters and for the public at large and protect them from harm. Republicans, meanwhile, are sitting in a stupefied fog of libertarianism, doing nothing while their ideas are suppressed and their supporters are silenced. One day they'll look up and find they have no supporters at all. Who will be to blame for that? Only themselves. Dr. Robert Epstein is not a Republican, but he is the preeminent researcher into this subject. He's a senior research psychologist at the American Behavioral Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology. And he is, again, the world's great expert on the effect of the tech companies on political discourse. He joins us tonight. Dr. Epstein, thank you very much for coming on. Seeing
always a pleasure.
This videotape, reading the quotes from this Google executive, does this confirm what you've said in the past? Are you surprised by this? What's your response?
I'm not surprised in the least. It confirms in glowing terms, or in very ugly terms, if you want to look at it that way, that Google not only has the power to shift opinions and votes on a massive scale, but that they exercise this power. And this is what I measure in my research. So I can tell you fairly precisely how many votes they can shift. I can tell you fairly precisely how many votes they shifted in 2018.
So why is that not hacking an election?
Well, it's not hacking an election right now because Google and similar companies like Facebook are completely unregulated in the United States. So they can do whatever they please. And if they all work together in 2020 to support the same presidential candidate, which is very likely, and probably it'll be a candidate that I support, by the way, they can shift upwards of 15 million votes with no one knowing that they've been manipulated and without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace.
So that's it. There's no election at that point. Our democracy is not real if that's allowed to happen. Correct?
Well, democracy becomes an illusion. Now, there are actions one can take. I've set up so far the only two big monitoring systems that anyone has built to actually look over people's shoulder as they're doing election-related, online activities. and to aggregate that information and see what they are being shown by these big companies. Now, in 2020, I'm actually trying right now to raise funds to build a large-scale monitoring system to keep an eye on these companies and to catch them in the act, literally catch them when they are manipulating votes and opinions. And in my opinion, that's the only way we can stop them. There are no laws in place that can stop them at the moment.
Calling attention to it might be the first step, and you've done more than anyone to do that. Dr. Epstein, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Dave Rubin hosts the Rubin Report on YouTube. The Google whistleblower says that his channel is one of the channels that Google's algorithms work to suppress.
Followed me on Twitter, so I've got over 1 million subscribers on there, and I don't have as much of it as an email address of someone at YouTube, but maybe I am starting to make some headway now. And, you know, quickly to your point on where sort of libertarians are at right now, I think there's an interesting moment here where generally small government people, and I think you're sort of in that group too, you know, our limits are being pushed on what small government actually means. And for me, I would always prefer a private answer to this in competition, but maybe there has to be a sort of two-pronged approach where politicians are putting pressure and then public people are putting pressure, and we can maybe make these companies sort of be a little more transparent, be a little more open, which really is all anyone's asking for here.
Yeah, I'd bring them to heel by force tomorrow. I wouldn't. The libertarian solution, I think, we're past that time. And would you allow a power company to say we're denying you electricity because you voted for someone we don't like? Of course, we would not allow that.
Well, I think that's
the utilities exist
totally
because the government
argument.
allows them to exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a totally valid argument. Look,
as my
you know, as my friend Eric Weinstein says, it's like one day are we going to get to the point where our Republicans are going to be allowed to have phones in their homes? I mean, that's sort of where we're heading with all of this. My preference would be that these companies, through public pressure, will move. But you might be right, and I think that's just an incredibly rich debate that we should be having more often.
Yeah, I never thought I'd say that, but they've pushed us all. Dave Rubin, great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So there you heard it. I call it Google the real story. Now, you heard it yourself. And if you hadn't have heard it yourself, you wouldn't have believed it, would you? So these social media platforms are acting as so-called gatekeepers, the truth. But whose truth? If you only have one view, one opinion, one commentary, how can that always be the truth? I say it can't. Certainly in America, you have the constitutional right to free speech. Canadians also thought they had it. Only by hearing all sides can you arrive at a considered opinion. Imagine this. I'll give you a current example. Imagine, if you will, that you have just been watching the Democrat roundtable debate. But not that debate. It's the debate. The debate that would decide the candidates for the President of the United States. If that was all you knew about them, and all that you had to vote for, and all the questions that were to be asked, what decision would you make? Because the other debate in the world of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. would be considered either inappropriate or not newsworthy. How could you possibly make an informed, balanced and measured decision? You know the answer. You couldn't. That's the point. So we are allowing the social media platforms to be biased to one view of the truth, one view of life, one view of democracy. Because if you're honest with yourself, that's not democracy at all. Finally, in Canada, we face the exact opposite in a way to how you face it in America. You have a Republican, or what we call conservative leader, and your media is trying to silence him, his party, and the citizens of America who dissent from the view, that being of the mainstream media in the US and the Democratic Party, that all being the same, of course. In Canada, we face kind of the exact opposite. Now, we suffer under what I call a federal liberal communist regime, who are pushing social media to silence conservatives and the Conservative Party and all their policies from being heard even going as far as to call the Conservatives racists, and then to threaten to take, quote, action, whatever that means, if some comments are not taken down. Many Conservatives in Canada, as in the US, have been silenced, muzzled, whatever you want to call it. Their goal in Canada, unlike the US, is to maintain the Liberal communist regime, while in the US it's the exact opposite, to bring down and to stop the re-election of that party. The common denominator for this is social media in both countries are interfering with democracy, all in their cause for socialism, or in the case of Canada, the continuation of it. Surely in a democracy, in a democratic country, it's we the people, not we the social media. Consider the effect on Canada, and also consider the effect on America. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others, and you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.